Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of Chasing the Cup. I'm Corey Miller here with Hanna Yates. And Hannah, so far, the experts look right. The Blues have been outmatched by Colorado in the first two games. They're in a hole. They're in an 0-2 hole as they head back here to St. Louis. Let's break down the actual play first, what we saw so far in the series and in game two before we get to some of the extracurricular activities we got to talk about, because that's what most people are talking about today when we're recording this on Thursday. But first, the game. Jordan Binnington has faced 82 shots in two games. I mean, that's just not sustainable, especially compared with how many shots the Blues are getting off. He's held it together as best as he can, but at some point, the dam's going to break, and this guy really just he's done as best as he could, but it's not enough.
It's incredible. I mean, it's enough as a goaltender. It's not enough to carry this team through an entire series or even to go on a run if they were to make it past this series. And so I was looking at some of the numbers and looking that Jordan Binnington has an .897 save percentage. If you were to go online and just look at that, you'd be like, wow, that's really not great. No wonder they're losing the first round. But if you're watching these games, he's legitimately standing on his head. And really, it's the only reason this team has even had a shot to this point. But you're right, it's not sustainable.
Is this just Colorado being great on the rush and coming at you real fast and that top line just being dominant? Or is it something the Blues, particularly on defense, are just not very good at right now?
I think it's a combination of the two, honestly, because if you're looking at some of the regular season games where the Blues won, it's because they limited that top line. Nathan MacKinnon wasn't scoring in those final games against the Blues in the games that they won in that out of the 8-game series during the regular season. So the Blues found a way to minimize that top line, but it's also, there's not a lot of cohesion on defense. There's a lack of discipline last night. So you saw that in game two, a lack of discipline on the Blues end to where they're going to score on the power play. The Colorado Avalanche have the 8th best power play in the National Hockey League, but it is a lot of that run and gun game that the Blues were falling subject to.
So, Hannah, I'm going to make you the coach now. You're Craig Berube. How do you stop that top line of MacKinnon, Landeskog, and Rantanen? Is it just a matter of roughing it up a lot? Because Berube said that's going to be a focus for sure, but we don't want to overdo it. I mean, the Blues are out hitting them by a lot so far in these first two games, and that's still not getting it done. What do you do?
I think that that's probably the biggest component here. The only way that you can slow down a Nathan MacKinnon, a Gabriel Landeskog, a Mikko Rantanen is by slowing down their game. The only way you can slow down their game is by playing more of a heavy forechecking kind of game. If you're looking at last night, and really in game one as well, the way that Colorado has scored is because someone's screening the net, and then Nathan MacKinnon is finding complete right on goal access to where he just snipes one in. And it's almost the same setup every single time that Nathan scored. It's not like he's going around the backside of the net and just getting one in. It's not a bunch of one-timers here and there. I mean, they're setting up the perfect formation. It's identical, and the Blues are still struggling to shut that down and to cut off that source. So I think you really have to make sure that you're getting in between your goaltender and the net and not letting someone from Colorado do that right there, net front forecheck.
Yeah, there are a couple screenshots of those first four goals, and it's just a pile on Jordan Binnington and nobody clearing the lane out. And MacKinnon's got a nice snipe for it, like you said, with guys mucking it up in front. So they definitely got to clean that up if they want a shot. One thing that's for sure, though, this team's not going to roll over. They've got some gumption, they got some grit. Grit can't take them all the way to the end. But I remember watching, I forget who scored the goal, and then the Blues come back and Mike Hoffman scores 15 seconds later. So they know how to bounce back. They're not just going to roll over here and make this series. I don't think they're going to end up getting sweeps. I think they're going to get at least one game here, but they're not going to go quietly. That's for sure.
100%. And I think that's the heart and soul of this team. It's not like they've been a quitting franchise. That's not the identity of this group. You have a lot of guys like Braden Shen, Ryan O'Reilly, Jordan Binnington. It's not in their blood to just quit out on the ice. I think that that's the capability of what this team can do. And perhaps that's the most frustrating part of watching these first two games is knowing what this team is capable of and then coming back and be like, okay, now we'll do this in the third period when there's 4 minutes left in the game. But where was that initiative in the first period? Where was that, to shut that down from the start? That's perhaps the most frustrating part.
Correct my grammar here. I said getting swept, but there's a reason.
We won't hold you accountable for it.
There's a reason that's not in my vocabulary, I guess, because we usually don't see that from the Blues. Let's get to the extracurricular stuff now. everybody's talking about it today. Avalanche forward Nazem Kadri's hit on Justin Faulk in the third period of game 2. It was gross. I mean, he went for his head. Faulk obviously was affected by it. He looked woozy skating off. He didn't return to the game. This was a pretty bad hit. The AP's reporting he's been suspended indefinitely pending a hearing for the hit. I mean, he has a history. This was just terrible to see.
It's unacceptable, honestly. Like, I understand that the sport of hockey is this physical game and you know what you're getting into, but that was not physicality. That's not part of the game. It's unacceptable in this game, and I'm really happy to see that the league's not tolerating that. We've seen actions like that from him in the playoffs, even in 2019, as well as from Tom Wilson, and those are certain players that have developed that reputation, and it's not something that's forgiving by other players. You look at the Blues press conference following game 2, Braden Shen, Ryan O'Reilly, a lot of guys speaking up on just this not being an acceptable form of that heavy physical play. That's not what it is. And there should be no intention to hurt a player, specifically a head concussion.
Yeah, Kadri's been suspended or fined 8 times in his career. He's been suspended 3 times in the playoffs. So Braden Shen said he can't help himself, which I thought was a really interesting way of putting it. Here is some more of what the guys had to say after the game about the hit on Justin Faulk.
A guy like Kadri, guy can't control himself. In the playoffs, he's a repeat offender, bad hits, greasy hits, and he's got a guy in a vulnerable position and he picks nothing but the head. So, last time we seen one of those hits, it was Oscar Sundqvist getting hit by Wilson, and that was years ago. So in the Blues hockey, anyway. So hopefully the league takes care of it, and we need to now focus on games 3 and 4, and the league will take care of those guys' hits.
Yeah, that's a very dangerous hit. That's it's got to be a suspension. It's dangerous. He's a repeat offender. Like that's completely uncalled for. That's it's awful to see.
So Robert Bortuzzo also exited the game with an upper body injury. He looked to his head as well, and he caught an elbow up there. So the Blues played with 4 defensemen for a little while at the end. Jake Wallman still on COVID, the COVID list. What is this team going to do if they're missing Bortuzzo and Justin Faulk for game 3?
Right. And you obviously hope that neither of those players have a concussion. We're still waiting to hear if both are confirmed concussion. And so you would hope that maybe Robert Bortuzzo would not have a concussion. Maybe he would be ready to go. Craig Berube said following the game that he would be more likely of the two who could potentially play. So you hope he would be game ready. He did clarify that Jake Wallman, who he had said before, I think we'll be ready to have him by game 3 or 4. He's made very clear that he will not be ready to go for game 3, which I think is very upsetting for the team. But then you have to look at a Vince Dunn, who is more likely ready to go. So Vince Dunn was originally out with an injury, but then he ended up getting the flu. So he's been overcoming the flu in the past few days. And so that's actually the cause of why he's not been out, according to the team. And so you hope to see him inserted into the lineup, but it's kind of slim pickings down with some of the defensemen that the Blues could even pull up at this point, because some of the top prospects, the defensemen, Scott Perunovich had a season-ending injury in February, a shoulder injury, to where he had to get surgery. So a lot of the guys are already pulled up or had season-ending injuries. So it's not a lot of people that we're familiar with at this point.
Blues just kind of piecing it together here as we head to game 3 and 4 back in St. Louis in the first round. We got to talk about a little more extracurricular stuff that caused a scare on Wednesday afternoon. And thank goodness we're not talking about it. We're only looking back talking about it, not how it's hopefully going to impact them further. But for a few hours, it was pretty scary, looking like the Blues might not even play, because they had 4 guys at least that were speculating were involved in this COVID testing discrepancy with a lab, along with some Golden Knights players. No Tarasenko, no Binnington, no Scandella, no Schwartz out on the ice for morning skate. And that just sent everybody into a frenzy. NHL clarified it as a testing issue, and they were all able to play. I think it probably affected, Ruby wouldn't let it be an excuse or anything, but I think it definitely affected Jordan Binnington in the game, not getting that pregame skate in. Just a weird few hours yesterday for the Blues.
It was, and it was also for the Vegas Golden Knights. There were multiple franchises that were affected by this because a lot of what the NHL does is these COVID tests that are taken are sent to one lab. And so each area has their own designated lab in that portion. So with the Blues being out towards that way in the West Division, their tests were actually sent to LA. And so there was one specific lab to where there were multiple false positives with multiple teams outside of just the St. Louis Blues. And so something the NHL was doing were a lot of saliva tests to where it's just typically called a spit test. And some of those have been a false positive. It's kind of an easier test to get, but a little more inaccuracy there. And so having those swab tests as a backup has been helpful. But obviously that would not have been great for the Blues, who are already shorthanded with injuries and illness at this point.
It's been a weird last 2 years, I guess, for the Blues with injuries and COVID and everything in between. Hopefully the weirdness is past for a little bit. At least the Blues can get back on their feet in games 3 and 4 here in St. Louis starting on Friday. That'll do it for Hannah and I on this episode of Chasing the Cup. Hopefully we'll be back with some better news next time. Bye, everybody.